Well, ladies and gentlemen, as promised, I have a fantastic guest with us today. I'm sitting here and speaking with Michael James Kacey. He is a Army veteran and also the owner of Anthracite Films. Mike, how are you?
I'm fine, Rob. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh,
Appreciate
it's,
it.
it's the pleasure's all mine. This is real fun. So I obviously want to hear about your projects in the film industry, but um, I guess we'll start with the background here of what were the circumstances that led to your decision of joining the Army. And could you tell us a little about the origin story there of of the
Yeah,
Army days for you?
it's funny to think back on those days now. I'm from the coal region, from Shamokin, Pennsylvania, and so it was a coal town. And my dad had served in the Navy. He'd been in the Navy in the 50s and the early 60s, and he had these great stories. And I wanted to serve. I wanted to serve. I wanted my own stories, I think. And I did get my own stories for sure, and so much more out of it. I had a great uncle on my dad's side who died at the Battle of the Bulge. I had a great uncle on my mother's side who died in Burma as part of Merrill's Marauders. So there was kind of a lineage to it, but we weren't really, I would say, like a military family. I was 17 years old. I was expected to go to college, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to. And I needed time. And so at 17, I enlisted. Parents signed off on it. And I remember they weren't particularly happy about it because they thought I was going to go to college too. And my mother said, well, he's just going to wait 2 more months and then he's going to go in himself. He's going to sign, for himself. So years later, she said that was the best decision for me,
Yeah.
because of the man that I became through it. And so I take satisfaction in that. So that's why I joined to get money for college, which I did. So it ended up paying for college.
Excellent.
And I'll just say this other thing. I think you're 17 years old. I wanted to be an actor or a writer or something like that, but I think I was too scared. I
Hmm.
was too afraid.
Hmm.
And I think not only was the Army going to buy me some time to kind of get it together, but I was going to see what kind of person I was, I think. And I think I needed that. I didn't know who I was, and I wasn't quite sure if I could pursue my dreams, if I should.
Wow. So
Hmm.
it was your away year, but what do they call it? The gap year. I'm gonna take it.
My gap year was 5 years, three
Yeah,
months.
yeah, the most challenging gap year. Oh, that's
Yeah, that
fantastic.
was great. It was
Yeah.
great.
Well, tell us a little bit about maybe one of your duty stations or where you traveled, some places you might have gone.
Oh, sure, sure. I started out at basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina
Ah,
in
yes.
August, and I was on a place called Tank Hill. They had the World War II barracks. Then I went to Goodfellow Air Force Base for AIT. I was a signals intelligence analyst, and Fort Devens for a little extra training. And then my duty assignment was the 1st Cavalry Division, Fort Hood, Texas.
Oh, yes. Good old Fort Hood.
Yeah, so I logged quite a few miles walking the motor pool, some time in the field. That thing about like painting rocks and things like that. I
Yep.
actually had to do that once. They try and keep you busy doing a lot of things, but there was one point where I was like, we're going to repaint these lines and those rocks. I said, you're kidding me. I'm actually going to paint rocks. I mean, that's a joke, isn't it? Mm.
Reorganize them set by size, large to small. Yeah.
It was funny. Yeah. Open up the Connex, empty it out, sweep it out, put the stuff back in, keep busy. And on it was very hot. You'd have to do your PMCS on your vehicles, and you'd be out on the line. And I had a Gamma Goat. I had one of the big, what was it, M581. It's funny what sticks in your head. And I found out again from another guy, you know, that what you do is you have to go underneath and check all the lube points, 100 lube points under the Gamma Goat or whatever. But it was nice and cool. It was cool when it was hot there in Fort Hood, and you could just kind of, I don't want to say take a nap, but you could kind
Right.
of relax.
Double check. Just do it.
Yeah. So after that, so what I did was then they were looking for linguists. They were looking for Intel analysts with a language trailer, and Vietnamese for some reason was needed. This was 1982,
Okay.
83, and which surprised me. But so I applied for it and I got in. So I did a year at DLI in Monterey,
Hmm.
and that was wonderful,
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful place. It was, looking back on it now, it's very hard to remember. I mean, I can't speak Vietnamese now, but by the time I got out of it, I could read it. I was fluent in it. It was amazing.
Hmm.
And then I went to Okinawa. I was sent to Field Station Okinawa, and I spent 18 months on the Rock, and that was there's a lot of things there that was life changing, I think, for me.
Hmm.
Um, and when I came back, my last duty assignment was CENTCOM in the MacDill Air Force Base. So I ended up with a nice cushy place
Yeah.
to end, and then after that, then after that, I went to college, and I got out as an E5.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Do you ever sit and think about maybe, you did more than half a decade there, so you met a lot of people from all different walks of life. You probably had different leaders. You became a leader. Was there a
Yeah,
particular lesson or mentor, or any experience there that you still draw on today that's very relevant now, all these years later?
yeah, yeah. That one comes easy to me because when I was in basic training, I had trouble with the push-ups. I couldn't. You had to do 30, only 30 in basic to get out, and I think my best was like 22.
Hmm.
And this was near the end of might have been week 5 or something of 8. I got called into the CO's office. The man's name was Captain Genzer, and I walked in. And I knew I was going to be recycled. They were going to take me and they're going to move me back to another platoon, maybe 2 weeks earlier, that I'd have to repeat with brand new people. And essentially, Rob, it's that fear of failure.
Yeah.
Wow, there I was. I was trying to be in the Army and I was failing. Oh my goodness. And I walked in and he said, "Drop, give me push-ups." And I did as many as I could. Might have been 21, 22. And I remember I just stayed in that position, the front leaning rest. And, this August, it's, Tank Hill, South Carolina. And I remember the sweat dropping from my forehead onto the floor. And my arms were like, shaking. And I just stayed there for like an eternity. And then finally the captain said, "Recover." Stood back up. He says, "Private, I was going to recycle you." He says, "But I'm not going to. I'm going to tell you why. Your knee didn't hit the ground. You didn't quit." Dismissed.
Yeah.
That one, even
Yeah.
when I think about it now, that one changed my life.
Hmm.
It really did. Your knee didn't touch the ground. You didn't give up. Dismissed. And I'll tell you, and I had another guy in the platoon help me so I could pass the PT test. When I was running the 2 miles in the combat boots back in those days, I had two guys that I remember they slowed up and paced me for a little bit to make sure that I would pass, and it was a great lessons I got there. And if I could, I'd like to share one more that
Oh,
pops
of
to
course.
mind. Now, this one, we think about our days in the military, and we like to tell these stories about, the good times. Well, this one comes to mind, which wasn't me at my best. I got a summary article 15 when I was in Okinawa. And the command sergeant major wanted my stripes. And I was called into my captain's office, and this was a brand new captain. This was her first command.
Hmm.
And the first sergeant, my first sergeant top, argued about my character. And he said, "This was out of character. This is a good soldier." And I went in, I took responsibility. I was dismissed, and I said, "Oh boy, I'm going to lose that stripe." I didn't. I got 7 days extra duty. And I was, what I got out of that, Rob, was that it was the first time I realized my character my character counted. It mattered for something. And a couple of months later, I got an ARCOM. I got an Army Commendation Medal. And that same captain, Captain Miller, Captain Cheryl Miller, had to sign off on the paperwork when it went up the chain of command. She did. And I remember, this is what I remember, thinking about her character, what that told me about her.
Uh,
And then I thought about my first sergeant. And when you go out in life, you want to surround yourself with people of good character, and you want to appreciate it when you find it.
Hmm.
Those people that have good character, because it matters. And it's a lesson that stayed with me. So that's two
yeah,
that
that's
come to
fantastic.
mind.
Like,
But
yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, and to think about her character and to trust the leadership already in place to understand that someone spoke on your behalf, and she didn't dismiss that. Yeah,
right, and she could have, because the command sergeant major was obviously outranked the first sergeant.
sure. Yeah, that's fantastic. Wow. So, okay, so now I'd like to just kind of, if I could, ask about what it was like. You joined the army because you weren't sure on a few different things. You were young, trying to figure out what you want to do. You knew you wanted to act. You knew you wanted to get into some type of film career. So now, when it came time for you to transition from the army and to become, I always like to say, sometimes it's a lifelong process of becoming a veteran, but you certainly weren't going to just go back to being a 17-year-old civilian. So, what was
Right.
what was that transition for you? What were the circumstances of you leaving the army, and what did you do initially, and how did that evolve?
Well, when I left the army, I'd went to Penn State, and I majored in theater. So I dove right into that to see if I was any good at it. Turned out I was. And the other thing that I did was I got involved in the local radio. The local radio station there, they had, pardon me. So I got involved in the local radio scene, and they had it was called the Molten Metal Hour.
Hmm.
It's on Saturday nights, and so I got on the air doing that, and loved it. I mean, radio was always just something that I loved, and I got to do it for a little bit. And the transition was pretty smooth, but when you're in the military and there's a certain kind of life, and then you're out in the civilian world, and they're kind of people running around with no rules, no
Right.
guardrails.
Right.
And then you're working in the theater department, and you're meeting all kinds of people there, free spirits and stuff. And so part of it was overwhelming. But so I did that. I did some summer stock and some, getting some professional credits, because I knew I wanted to eventually move out to Los Angeles. I thought that's, I'd been out in California when I was in Monterey. I loved it out there. And so when I graduated, I got in the radio. I worked in radio for about 4 years, classic rock station, contemporary, adult contemporary station. And I loved it. And I was okay at it. I was good enough to be on the air, but I didn't have that magic, with that local disc jockey or whatever. And they just have that thing that you want to hear their show. So I was adequate, and I had fun, and I had a good time doing it. I got married, moved to Los Angeles. We raised our 2 sons there. And so I started to try to be an actor. And what I found I had to do was I had to work security jobs at night. And that was, being a veteran, was easy to get a job as a security officer.
Sure.
So I was working security at night, and I was auditioning during the daytime for many years. And my first job was at Universal Studios. So I was working the midnight shift at Universal Studios, and on the lower lot with all the sound stages. And it's 1992. Let me tell you this. Warner Brothers was doing Batman Returns.
Mhm.
And they had rented out one of Universal's largest sound stages. and they did the penguin's lair in there. And I was a supervisor, so I'd have to go in and I have to, check because they had real penguins in there.
I didn't know.
So yeah, and they had robot ones, and then they had real ones that they kept on the soundstage. And the soundstage was about 40 degrees at night. So I was supervisor. I had to go in and make sure the penguins were still alive. The air conditioning was still working. Anyway, I go in, and there's this black garment bag, and I walk over to it, and I unzip it a little bit, and it's Michael Keaton's Batman cowl. There I am. I'm touching Michael Keaton's Batman cowl, and I was like, "Wow!" I mean, wasn't say, "Hey, I've made it," but here's the funny part of it. 10 years later, I was working with Michael Keaton in a scene from Live from Baghdad.
That's so cool.
And I did not tell him that story. I did not say, Mr.
Well,
Keaton,
he
hey,
might be
pleasure
listening
working
to
with
now. Yeah.
yeah. But I thought how amazing. I think that's when I said, hey, I made it. I'm doing a scene with Michael Keaton.
Yeah.
In a film. One scene, one line, this is kind of my career, but it was I still marvel at it.
That is so cool. Yeah. That's
So
awesome.
I did that. So basically what I was doing, and I was auditioning during the daytime, got a few jobs. I did Beverly Hills 90210. I did a show on Nickelodeon called All That. And I did, of course, the stuff is streaming now. Oh, let me tell you this story. So I'm in the opening sketch on this show, All That, which is like Saturday Night Live for kids. And I I have a grandson now, and my son was streaming the episode for my grandson, who at the time was about 5 years old. And he's watching. He's going, yeah. He says, that's Grandpa. That's Grandpa there. And he looks at me, and he says, what happened to your face? This was 20 years ago. Yeah, well, I got old. And that answer satisfied him. Okay. Here we were thinking he was going to be all impressed. Grandpa was on TV. What happened to your face? Yeah. So I did that. I did a National Cracker Jack commercial. I did enough, but it wasn't really enough to sustain, that career. I was working, by this time I was now working for the J. Paul Getty Trust. So I was working in the Art Museum. I was working at the Getty Center and the Villa out in Malibu. And what a wonderful organization to work for and to be in security for. And I transitioned from that into being a trainer. So I would interview people, hire people, write training, deliver training for new hires, veterans, Red Cross, first aid training. So what was wonderful about that, because I was transitioning away from acting at that point, was that I was using these skills that would be part of filmmaking. Part of it's acting, it's presenting the training, it's writing and designing things. I did a training video. So all these things kind of, harkened back to the acting and filmmaking in me. And that was my passion. So how I got into filmmaking was during this time when I'm, still working security. I wrote and directed an independent film called Daybreak, and, shot it. It played some festivals, and it got a direct-to-video release. But it wasn't anything. You make these films hoping that it will be the stepping stone to the next project, and it wasn't. So I decided that I wanted to do something about radio. Well, I just, loved radio and radio history, as a matter of fact, golden age of radio. And I was out in Los Angeles, and one of the greats from those days was still alive, a fellow named Norman Corwin. And I interviewed him, and that actually became my first documentary. It's called The Poet Laureate of Radio, an interview with Norman Corwin. And it's really just his life story in that interview. And Norman Corwin, wrote at CBS some of the most patriotic shows during World War II. He wrote a show called On a Note of Triumph, which was aired on VE Day.
Hmm.
So the day that Germany surrendered, he did a program, and the opening line was, "Take a bow, GI, take a bow, little guy. The Superman of tomorrow lies at the feet of you common men of this afternoon."
Wow.
Incredible stuff. He also wrote one on VJ Day when after the atomic bomb, and Orson Welles read this line, which was the wrath of the atom fell like a commandment, and the very planet quivered with implications. I'll imagine Orson Welles reading that. So anyway, so I got to interview him, and then that opened the door for other people in old time radio. So I started doing these interviews for people in radio, and I suddenly just started doing more research on radio, and I thought, wow, this is a great story. The story of radio in America. It's the story of America.
Yeah.
And that's what led me from the Army to where I'm at now, which is really full-time working on this documentary film, which is called In the Public Interest.
That's fantastic. And for our audience that's not familiar with it yet, although we'll have a link, posted later to the trailer, but maybe you could just give a nice overview of the documentary and what those words mean and how important and significant those words are in the public interest.
Well, the film is it's exploring radio and its obligation to serve the public interest, and it kind of traces the battle for control of the public's airwaves by private companies, and it weighs the successes and failures of serving the public interest and its impact on our world today. And what the film looks at is 4 periods, primarily. The beginning years of the foundation of radio in the 1920s and 1930s, the conflict years in the 1960s. America was changing, radio was changing, and it was maybe the height of the public interest service. We'll look at the 1990s, deregulation, changes in ownership rules. What does that mean? Kind of unpacking that, and how did that impact radio? And then we'll look at where we are today. And in terms, Rob, of the public interest, what that means, that is the $1 million question. And that's, in a way, the fun part of this documentary, because in 1927, the Radio Act of 1927 went into effect to restore order to the airwaves, because people were jumping signals. They were going wherever they wanted as radio became more popular. And so they had to have some regulation. They said, look, you're going to get the broadcaster gets use of the public airwaves for free in exchange for serving the public interest, convenience, and necessity. That's the phrase. It's not defined, but it was given to understand that, you're going to have your license as long as you do serve your listeners. Make all the money you want. You're advertising, that's fine. You got to stay in business. You're not a charity, but serve your local community. And in 1934, when that became the Federal Communications Act, same language appears. In 1996, they rewrote that act as the Telecommunications Act of 1996. That phrase still exists. And it's interesting, is like, what does that mean? For a long time, it was news, providing news. Another time, it was about public debate. There was a fairness doctrine. Both sides are as many sides to an issue as were pertinent. What does it mean to us today, I think, is the question that I have. And the public interest has been defined by some as whatever interests the public. So that if people like the Kardashians, I'm kind of jumping to
Right.
television cable, then we're serving the public interest because we're giving them what they want. But the question is, for a functioning democracy, is that enough? Is that the proper use? Is that what the airways were envisioned to be used for? So it's, to me, it's fascinating. And I think that because it was never defined, I think that's deliberate. And I think it's for us to define. What does it mean for us now?
Right.
It doesn't have to mean the same thing it meant in 1965, 1945, 1985. And I don't know what if there are solutions, but that's part of what the film is doing,
Yeah.
is kind of probing and
I
looking
love it.
at how radio did serve the public interest. And, you could talk about Edward R. Murrow reporting from London as bombs were falling,
Hmm.
and he's short-waving his broadcast back to America.
Wow.
Just there's some amazing
Yeah.
things. And we got to interview Larry King. Larry King told us some wonderful stories. I was very blessed to be able to interview some people that have passed away now. One of my earliest was Art Linkletter,
Hmm.
and we got to hear some wonderful stories. And Art Linkletter said radio was the open sesame to the world.
That's just incredible, Mike. I'm so glad you're spearheading and getting this done. What can our audience do to support while waiting? What can we do? Is there a website or someplace people can go to, watch a trailer, learn more, maybe share and spread that with their own networks?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've been working on this film for a number of years, and we're fundraising. We're applying for grants, and if you go to our website, which is the name of my company, Anthracite Films, so it's anthracitefilms.com. That's ANTHRACITEFILMS, if I'm saying that right. Okay. Anthracitefilms.com. It's even hard for me. There's like a 3-minute sample trailer. That's kind of what we submit to grants. And there's a donation page. We have a fiscal sponsor called the International Documentary Association, and that's used for donations that are tax deductible.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
individuals can give to that. And of course, obviously, if we get grants, and the grants also use that mechanism as well.
Excellent. Okay. And I'll make sure we have a link posted to our online presence as well after the year. We'll probably have that on the following day. So that's fantastic. Wow.
Yeah.
What you have quite the story, and I feel like you're just getting started with this next one here. So it's going to be fun to watch that progress and to view that documentary and see what other doors it opens for beyond that story. But you hit a real big one here. I mean, I think a lot of people, our audience specifically, appreciates what you're working on. I mean, we broadcast on AM, and we have an FM signal as well, but we broadcast on AM. So our audience are folks that really appreciate radio. And you and I talked offline before about how the early days of radio was a huge way of being entertained. You would hear entire plays, entire performances, and your imagination can hear the performers speak, and you're actually visualizing everything that's going on in the show. And that's an art form that's really been kind of lost. Not that people can't do it, but that the opportunity is not there anymore. Now we live in this world of 10-second TikTok videos or something like that, and you
Right.
lose that lack of imagination. And I think our audience for sure appreciates what you're talking about.
Well, and I think, Rob, they must appreciate also what you're doing with this show and what your station does, because I think local ownership, I think, makes such a difference. And in the film, we're going to talk about the effects of consolidation on the media and why. And from a business standpoint, why stations all started sounding the same, and voice tracking, where they actually have DJs that they pre-record everything, the computer drops them in, whereas when you have local ownership and local shows, that, to me, you're asking me personally, that's serving the public interest. That's what it's about.
For sure. And our station here is owned by, I'll tell you, one of the most incredible folks that really does try to work with the community. let the audience know what's going on in our community. It is very local, it's managed local by folks that care about our neighbors. And I
Well,
think
congratulations to your ownership, by the way, then, because
yeah,
that's important,
yeah, they do
I
it,
think.
and he's a veteran as well. But yeah, he and his team do a fantastic job, and that's why I broadcast. I mean, I could broadcast anywhere, right? I could do this anywhere. I I chose this area for a reason, and the call sign of AM 1440 is a WBR, which is one of the oldest call signs. So there's a lot of history there as well, and our audience knows that. So I think you're uh, you're hitting the nail on the head here. You're hitting a topic that's really important to discuss. And for some of us who aren't as familiar with the history, this is going to be really fun to watch and learn what you're presenting. So I thank you so much, and I certainly thank you for your time in the Army and everything you learned there and serving our country. And it's pretty remarkable. I do have one final question though.
Sure.
You see, I caught on to the fact that you joined before you were technically old enough, and they had to, folks had to sign a permission slip,
Hmm.
and you did that when you didn't even have confidence of what you were going to do. So you chose something that typically is something people run away from, right? There's people that even during the draft are like, no, I can't do that. I want to go to school. And here you were like, I can't go to school. I want to do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love that. And I now that you've lived this fantastic adventure and you're nowhere near done, you're just, this is just another new chapter. But
Mhm.
now that you've had all these experiences, if there was a way for you to communicate with your younger self, have a couple sentences or a bit of advice or guidance, or warnings, I don't know, but something that you would want to tell your younger self prior to joining the Army, with everything you know now, what would be that message to young Michael?
Hmm. That message would be, you are going to see people. You're going to see the best in people. You're going to see people at their best. You're going to see people at their worst. Um, you are going to find the best in yourself, and you may also get a glimpse of the worst. And what I would say to myself, I would say that remember that no one is perfect, and that includes you.
Hmm.
I think that's what I would have needed to hear and embraced a little sooner in my life, that nobody is perfect, including me. And then the other thing, Rob, I would say, take more pictures. Just take a lot of
Yeah,
pictures,
yeah.
because you forget these things. Take pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It,
well
it's
said.
been fascinating to reflect back on my time, and then and I'm sure all the veterans listening, can point to similar points in their lives, and uh, how it's made them better people, and that we remember those good times, and we also we don't think about the bad times, but we made it through bad times, but personally, or things we've seen, things we did, and we were stronger for it, and we were doing it for a noble purpose. We were serving our country because we believed in that and believe in it. And the other thing is, being a veteran allowed me to talk to other veterans. There's an instant rapport. And
Oh, for sure.
when I
For
was
sure.
training, and I worked with other veterans, and I trained other veterans, and it doesn't, you don't have to be even American veterans, but people from other countries. They confer upon you a certain amount of respect, because guess what? You've been there, you've done it.
Yeah,
You're in the club.
yeah,
And I'm so glad I did it. I really am.
yeah, absolutely. I like to say that somehow it's almost like we chose to alter our DNA just a little.
Mhm.
There's something by making a couple different decisions led us to have this, we're all part of that association now. So
Yeah.
you're right. You
Yeah.
have instant rapport with other vets, and that's an
Hmm.
interesting way to live. So,
Hmm.
well, Mike, I want to thank you again. I want to thank you for your service. Thank you for your time, and I'm really excited about what you're working on. And folks, just want to say once again, I've been sitting here and enjoying the time with Army veteran Michael James Kacey, and he is also the owner of Anthracite Films. And you can check out his website and his current documentary that he's working on. And we just want to say thank you again for your time, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Rob. Pleasure.